Welcome back to this next episode of Japan's top business interviews. I'm Greg Story, the president of Dale Carnegie Training today. My special guest today is Frank Foley, who was the managing director, Japan head of HarperCollins. Frank, welcome.
Thanks very much.
Now, actually, Frank and I are both alumni of Modern Asian Studies, Griffith University, Brisbane, Australia. We're about 2 years apart, I think, from memory. So, Frank, tell us, how did you get from Griffith Modern Asian Studies to being the head of HarperCollins and other companies, by the way, as we'll get to, in Japan? Right.
First of all, Greg, thanks for having me along here. I'm a huge fan of your podcasts.
Appreciate that.
Particularly this one. So I first came to Japan, it was actually 41 years ago. It was a short exchange first for 3 months. I came in the month when John Lennon was assassinated. It's always how I remember when I came to Japan. So it was 1980, 1980, wasn't it? Yeah, 1980 was my first visit. I've worked in Japan for 30 years. I went from Griffith, came as an exchange student to Japan first for a couple of years after that, and then started my work career with Hitachi in Brisbane, basically as an interpreter. Then I went down to the Australian National University, to the Australia-Japan Research Centre, with our good friend, Peter Drysdale.
Peter Drysdale, yes.
And I went down there with the intention of, the position I was in was set up to study while working, and it was meant to bring me and I was very interested in getting back into study, into academia, doing a master's there. And to be honest, by that stage, I'd got I was more into making money than I was into studying. And the job I had while I was there, I was the publications officer at the Australia-Japan Research Centre. And that really got me interested in publishing. With great support from Peter, actually, I ended up getting a job at that time with HarperCollins. So I came to HarperCollins, I came to Japan first time with HarperCollins, and now have bookended my career in a sense with going back to HarperCollins. So HarperCollins got me into News Corporation. And at one point, Murdoch started to divest from educational publishing, and that's mainly what we were doing here in Japan and Asia, and investing in satellite TV. And I sort of went with that flow, so moved over to, we set up a Star TV office, the Hong Kong-based service.
That was a Star TV office here in Japan, in Tokyo?
Yeah. We actually launched the first digital channel in Japan with bringing Star TV channel in. And then Murdoch got together with Son Masayoshi, and then Fuji TV came in, and the whole Sky Perfect TV thing evolved out of that.
So what was your role at Sky Perfect TV at that time?
I was on secondment from News Corporation, and it really was, key partner management type thing, relations. I didn't have any particular expertise in TV. It was just really language and a knowledge of Japan, and it was just really making sure things. I was liaising really between the News Corporation people and the Japanese partners.
So did you meet Rupert Murdoch?
Oh yes, yeah. I mean, Mr. Murdoch he's famous for really getting involved in projects in the early days. Sleeves rolled up, and he was very, very involved with in the early days.
Is he scary?
You learn not to talk, basically. You shut up and you listen, and you do what you're.
Yes,
not
Mr.
what you're told, but you.
No, Mr. Murdoch.
It's not so much that. I mean, it was very, very demanding, And I was in those days. I was, barely 30 years old. I think I was a fly on the wall, and just following up on everything later on, making sure things happened. But yeah, it was great to be involved in those. Like any startup is great fun, but this was it was Murdoch and Son and head of Fuji TV and Sony as well.
And you met Son Masayoshi as well?
Well, again, I was, fly on the wall type thing. I was sitting there in all the meetings listening to what was happening. Mm-hmm. I would doubt very much that he would ever remember who I was. But my boss, another mutual friend of ours, John McBride, was very close. I mean, it was really John was at that senior level, was managing everything for Rupert and working with Son Masayoshi.
Well, John McBride was in the same Rugakse Kaikan, Kumaba Todai Mai, when I came here on a Mombusho scholarship. Yeah. He was on one too. He was doing the undergraduate program. I was doing the graduate program. I met John way back in the day. Yeah. So another Aussie, another
it is.
Japan Mafia Aussie connection there. Yeah, keep going.
So, John is actually Nakodo as well.
Was he?
So he's
Really?
responsible for my marriage. So I think
Really did well. Really did well.
So that took me into TV, into the satellite TV thing. News Corporation along the way then established their own broadcasting company. It was called News Broadcasting Japan at the time. Later became Fox International Channels, which is now part of Disney. The way things move. And I worked there as a channel manager for a while, and then eventually took that over as the country manager, and did that for
So when
many
you were
years.
a country manager there, how many people were in your team?
Well, this is part of the story there. Well, when I joined, it was 80, and then within a year I was there, it was 40. My first job really was the toughest, most traumatic thing I've ever done in my career was downsizing. So it was once we settled down, it was 40.
So welcome to
40
News
people.
Corporation. Please fire half the staff.
And it was just one of those things, everything was moving so quickly when satellite television was launching here. There was, Perfect TV was already set up, and that was, Itochu and some Japanese companies. Then Murdoch and Son come in and they said, well, we're going to blow these blocks out of the water. They ended up merging, of course, to form Sky Perfect. So Sky comes from B Sky B, and then Perfect TV that brought that together. At the same time, DirecTV was coming in. Hughes and Mitsubishi were setting up DirecTV as well. So it was just all moving so quickly that, investments were made in different areas, and then later on the strategy changes or the technology changes or whatever. So it was one of those things, that it was just overbuilt in one area not for any wrong reasons or anything, needed to be restructured.
This is probably your first occasion, I guess, to be running a team in Japan yourself as the head.
Yeah, I'd run a small team at HarperCollins, and that was actually an Asia-Pacific job, Japan-based, except for the last 2 years I was down in Singapore. But yeah, there was a sales operation. It was very focused on sales reps in each of the countries. But, 15 people all up.
What were some of the challenges you ran into? You're young, relatively speaking. You're in a breathtakingly fast-moving industry with some very big players and a lot of people involved. So what were some of the challenges for you to be a leader at that young age?
It was tough. And, to be really honest, I'll sit here and talk about what I think about this and what I think about that and everything. But, most of the stuff that is things that you learn the hard way along the way, school of hard knocks.
What were some of the hard lessons you learned?
The hard lessons we learned were, it's, I've heard someone else on one of your other podcasts there talk about sort of bringing people from the sort of the what world to the why world, to be working with a knowledge of strategy, and everyone's on the same page at a certain level, and then things become easy after that. There's a filter to guide decisions, so you don't have to worry about so much. When things develop really quickly, there's not so much clarity on the strategy for the company. At the same time, you've got your head office overseas, who are in far more mature markets when it came to pay TV, with an enormous amount of expertise. And the expectations are very high from that side. And then you've got the team over in Japan who we're all learning as we go along. Trying to manage that was very hard. The other thing for me was, I'm probably the perfect example of a general manager, because I don't have any expertise really in anything that I've done in terms of specific industries. I was not a TV person. I was not actually a publishing person either, although I've worked in those businesses for a long time. What I am is a brand person, brand licensing and brand management, and approaching things from a brand point of view. So even back in those days at Fox, even though I was inexperienced, my inclination was to lead with the brand, try and figure out, understand our brand, understand the Japanese market at the same time, and then try and tweak that brand to give Japanese viewers, in the case of television, readers, in the case of publishing, what they want.
So that's you at the macro level as a leader setting the direction, but as a leader of people, what were the challenges you found as a leader of people leading Japanese for the first time on scale? Something came across your desk, that part of your job?
so like managing the expectations, the cultural difference between head office and the business in Japan was a major thing. When the first, coming in and having to lay people off, that's going to be hard anywhere.
Was this from the very get-go? Okay, congratulations, Frank. You're now in charge. These people have to go. Make it happen.
It was very early.
So this is Frank. Meet Frank.
Yeah.
He's firing half of you.
Yeah.
That must have been very, very hard for the survivors to deal with. How did you go around getting people to sign on for the rest of the journey when they may have been thinking, when is my number up?
Yeah.
When am I going to get the chop here from Frank? How did you get around that?
It was very, very hard. I think, as a general principle, if people understand why, well, then they'll tend to come along with you, even if they don't agree. So whether it was people losing their jobs or the people who were still there and sort of feeling survivor guilt to an extent, it really was about explaining why. And it was one of these situations where, it's me, it's not you.
What year is this we're talking about?
This was early 2000s, I think.
Early 2000s. So it's after the bubbles burst. Are we talking well truly after that?
Yeah.
But we're sort of gotten through the dot-com boom and bust.
Yeah.
So we're sort of post that.
Yeah.
Okay, so are things in the total economy, were things settling down? Were people able to get jobs fairly easily?
Well, I think as an industry, it was still growing really quickly. Everything there were new channels launching all over the place. There was
so there was
a lot of money.
Scope for them with experience to pivot and go into another firm.
Yeah. And so what I did then, and what I've always maintained as a principle for myself, is I made sure that we had a proper HR department. I don't mean an HR department that knows the rules and knows the regulations and essentially represents the company. I mean an HR department who's headed by a person who the staff is comfortable going along to and talking to and confiding in and
well, here's a
getting
good
advice
question.
from.
Most Japanese team members are scared of HR, and the idea of going to HR and telling them your problems is probably low on the list of priorities for a lot of people today. How did you find an HR person to actually do that? Because most of the HR people in Japan have grown up with, how many sick days have you had? You're an hour, you're 5 minutes late for lunch type of stuff, And so how do you find someone who's got that mentality to think about that particular task in the Japan context in a different way?
It was a partnership of two people actually at that time. And both of them women. And I think that's actually
and both
important.
Japanese?
One foreign, one from the News Corporation side, and another Japanese lady who'd been with the company for a long time. And, both just had that empathy or that, approachability. And I think having both of them working in tandem was really important as well, because it meant that, people were comfortable that information was being shared. Head office actually knew what was happening, and it wasn't just a Japan thing. We were doing this all by ourselves, and the flow back to head office about what the real issues were and how there are issues you have to deal with when you're laying people off in Japan, or that you might not have overseas.
And also, I guess one of the key roles there is HR does what you demand of HR. Right. So if you're demanding of these two HR people to have that empathy, be approachable, help the survivors to regroup and keep going, then they'll follow that direction. So your role in leading HR, I can imagine, was very critical. So what sort of things did you say to them to give them, this is how we're going here, this is how we're going to do it?
I mean, just be honest, be real, be yourself. It was a very sort of human touch to the whole thing. I mean, it was, it didn't all go smoothly, and there were, some issues that we had to deal with. But I think, in these situations, you just have to be yourself. What would you do?
Was this sort of an aberration for News Corp? My impression of those, as you say, the television business, the publishing business, newspaper, News Corp, lots of money, high-powered people, lots of pressure. It's up or out. It's, merciless. So here is Frank taking a particular view on this. I'm just wondering, did you sort of divert from the path? Would they have thought cold, hard, ruthless is fine, flog them, work them, don't need to be nice, and so you are totally different? Or were you fitting into a way of looking at things that was congruent with the organisation, or you were stepping out from the way the organisation did things?
No, there was certainly no pushback. At that time, again, it was in a startup type of situation. So, everybody knew that these things were going to happen. That really was just a case where a technical facility was built in one location, and then because of other partners who came in and changes in strategy that affected the whole industry, really, that particular facility was no longer needed, and so something needed to be done. So the context was very clear, it really went sort of as smoothly as it possibly could, and the only issues were there was no pushback from the News Corporation side, or there was, and it was really just personal issues, really. And
your boss was located in where?
Well, my boss for most of that time was John.
John McBride.
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, so he was in the next
John's got
office.
a really strong Japan background, understanding,
and that was very
empathy.
important. Yeah.
He would have naturally understood what needed to be done then, which is very helpful to have a boss. Like if you had some hardcore person, maybe you had a Sydney or New York or something, it might have been a bit tougher.
And it was a time when Rupert was very involved as well, so he knew the thing. And, I wouldn't say there is this image of news corporations being a really tough company and everything, but, certainly my most recent news corporation company, HarperCollins now, it's a terrific company. It's led, it really is the culture of the CEO himself. Brian Murray is his name.
Well, let's catch up to that in a moment. But how long were you in this hybrid startup, new TV business, which was at that time was called what? Fox International, was it? Or?
It was called News Broadcasting Japan.
News Broadcasting Japan. How long were you there? Jeez.
Yeah, well, I was with News Corp all up for about 17. At that time, I was there. I've been there for 20 years, including the last recent 3-year stint. But what happened was, I wasn't a TV person. I was a business development, key partner management type of person. I could work on the sort of more marketing and branding and that sort of stuff. But
what does being a TV person mean? Well, I'm sitting here thinking, I wonder if I'm a TV person. What would I have to be a TV person? Well,
TV started to get real here when ratings were, it's still pretty rudimentary, the rating system in Japan even today, even for terrestrials, it's a pretty rough system. But ad revenue started to be determined more by TV, by ratings. So you really had to know a lot about programming. You had to know, have a good feel for buying the right programming, and just how that's all presented on air and how it's promoted and everything. And it's quite a specialized world, and people who are very good at it are very, very good. So, I'm working for a company where, that owns B-Sky B and owns the Fox network in the US and Foxtel down in Australia, surrounded by experts, and I'm sitting there really not knowing a lot about the business. So to be honest, it just got to a stage there, and the business had grown to a point where they really needed TV people in there. And they started to bring those people in. And then sort of the transition to the next stage, and this has sort of been a feature of my life really, is that something always comes along that's really interesting just when you're ready to graduate from
This isn't the Frank Foley shiny object syndrome we're hearing about here, is it?
No, it was, it really is more, not outliving your usefulness sort of thing, being realistic about what your actual contribution is, taking it that far. And then, I don't know, in Japan, if these opportunities just come along and you see something else that's maybe just starting up or, needs to be sorted out or whatever, and your skills will work there.
And what was that thing?
Thomas the Tank Engine.
Wow, this is Thomas the Tank Engine as what entity?
Merchandising.
As merchandising as part of?
It's a company called Hit Entertainment.
Hit Entertainment.
Yeah, and Hit...
so this has nothing to do with News Corp?
No, this was a clean break.
Clean break, okay.
It was actually with some News Corporation people who were moving to Hit Entertainment from the consumer product side of Fox.
Now, is Hit Entertainment, is that an international company, a Japanese company? What is that?
It's now owned by Mattel.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
At the time, it was owned by a company called Ghislaine. Well, originally it was a company called Ghislaine, and then that was bought by a private equity firm called Apex. And I joined at the time when Apex bought the company. So they had big plans to expand, and Japan was, a priority market for them. So they wanted it.
And so
more.
Thomas the Tank Engine by that time was a hit product overseas. we're going to bring it into Japan.
Oh, no, it was huge here already.
It was already huge by the time.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, so Hit Entertainment had already launched it in Japan, and you joined after that.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so what was the attraction? I mean, they've already launched it; it's always running along. What was the attraction to make that move?
Well, I think, what I realized when I was working with, so the TV brands were Fox and National Geographic, the two main brands. Particularly with National Geographic, what I realized I really liked about those businesses was the brand itself, not the TV specifically, but about the brand and how it fitted with the lifestyle of Japanese people. And you can see the possibilities that go way beyond the actual business that you're in. So I really I was very interested in moving from a specific operational business, from one of these, what can be a silo, to the step above that, where you're really working with the brand and trying to figure out what the best strategy for the entire brand is. And Thomas the Tank Engine was that. Hit was the licensor, so it represented the family trust from the Reverend Audrey, who created the thing in the mid-40s. So Hit had all of those rights. So it's like the sky is the limit as long as you play by the rules of the brand. And that was really interesting to me.
I know that I spent an absolute fortune on Thomas the Tank Engine trains for my son. And I think we had the entire collection, or pretty close to it. It was unbelievable.
Yeah.
So it was massively popular.
Yeah, it is. And it was big in Japan. Fuji TV brought it into Japan in the mid-80s. And that's where the popularity started. By the time I joined, it was a household name. Actually, by the time I joined, you had second generation coming through of parents who had grown up on it themselves.
Right. So what was your role there in Hit Entertainment?
Was managing the brand, business development. The Hit Mattel still works with the same master licensee, a terrific company called Sony Creative Products. They are the experts. They do Snoopy. They still do Thomas. They Peter Rabbit. All the big brands. Sony Creative runs. So they had most of the business, maybe 75-80% of the categories were controlled by Sony Creative. So the job with them is to really make sure that that your brand and not Snoopy or Peter Rabbit is getting all their attention.
Right.
So you're working with them all the time on the big plans and the strategy and the strategies with individual licensees. And then the other part of the job is finding new business. There's always something else to do.
So how many people are working for you at this stage?
The licensing business is not a people thing, it's a quality thing. It's not a numbers thing, it's a quality thing. So we had maybe 5 people in Japan.
Right, so you're taking care of the 5 people in Japan.
Japan and Asia Pacific as well.
Plus Asia Pacific, right? Okay.
Yeah, so all up it's maybe 20.
So you've gone from running 40-odd people, 80 down to 40. Did it grow back up over the 6 years you were there?
It did, and then the business changed again.
Changed again, right?
At some stage, it made sense for Fox to invest in new channels and other businesses.
So how many people did you have at the end of the time there?
I pretty much went through at that level. Maybe went up to 50 or something. Yeah,
40, 50.
Yeah.
So you go from 40, 50 down to 5 in Japan. What was sort of difficult or different about that?
Roll your sleeves up. News Corp, all parts of News Corporation about rolling your sleeves up, but. When you're running a bigger company, you obviously have to step back a little bit and, manage departments and people and heads of those departments. Whereas Thomas, and to be honest, it's what I really love doing is small groups. That was all sort of, everyone's in together. And there's, getting the balance right between the big thinking, because, managing a brand is a very strategic thing. The big thinking and, getting out and helping when you can.
Okay, so how long were you doing that for?
So that group, Hit Entertainment, also owned Guinness World Records. Now there were acquisitions and stuff along the way, and they split up. But across those 2 brands, I worked there for about 8 years, I think, Thomas and Guinness World Records combined.
And were you running Guinness in Japan?
Yes.
That you actually as the head of that? So how many people are working for Guinness World Records in Japan?
Again, it's a small group, 5 people.
5 people,
yeah.
Right?
Yeah. It's now bigger. They've got more adjudicators on the ground, but it's still relatively small, maybe 15 or 20 people.
So you're basically moving around within the group from one section to another, right?
Yeah.
And were there any differences for running Guinness, different business, to Thomas the Tank Engine brands? What was interesting about that in terms of leading people?
The Guinness, the Thomas the Tank Engine character licensing, brand licensing, is a very established business. I mean, 70, 80% of the categories you do are the same thing everyone else is doing, and then you're spending a lot of time creating some new business. But the rules of the game are very, very fixed. The challenge with Guinness World Records was different. Guinness World Records in the traditional market is where there is a Christmas gift-giving tradition, and the Guinness book is it's a product that comes out in October, and it sells like crazy for 3 months. And the traditional business model for Guinness was create content for that book through the year by sending adjudicators out to adjudicate events and create all that content and recruit celebrity ambassadors and everything through that whole challenge thing. And that's a great model for those markets where the book sells really well. And the Guinness book is still, I think, after the Bible, or might even outsold the Bible, I can't remember now, but they use it in their marketing. The top-selling book in the whole world. We always
say How to Win Friends and Influence People is number 2 after the Bible.
All right, well,
we'll accept that Guinness must be up there too.
But that doesn't work in Asia. That doesn't work in Japan. That doesn't work in Asia. So the challenge with Guinness, to get back to your question, the challenge with Guinness was to figure out a new business model, really, for Japan. We were looking at Japan first. And, our starting point was any brand that is known by pretty much everybody in Japan must have a market here. There's got to be a way of monetizing it. So it's just a matter of figuring that out. That was the challenge there.
And how long are you doing that for?
Guinness, off and on, it overlapped with Thomas, so pretty 5 years or so.
5 years? Yeah. And then the next step was?
So where did I go after
Back
Guinness?
To Guinness?
No, Guinness then I went to, after Guinness World Records, I just had a call. I was thinking of doing my own thing. I look at people like you who've built your own businesses, and I think, wow, that's great. What if I can turn what I've known, what I've done so far, into a business? And I was working on that and had a bunch of consultancies with various brands trying to get into the market. Worked helped out the B League, the launch of the basketball, Japanese basketball league. Help them with their consumer products. And then I had a call from Universal Music that they were looking for someone to try and sort out their consumer products business, licensing for international artists like Rolling Stones and Lady Gaga and this sort of thing. And that was a situation that was very similar to the Thomas the Tank Engine situation, where the business had sort of been run in a certain way by certain people for a while, and they sort of defined what the business was. And head office was not convinced that actually was everything that could be done. So they needed to make a change, and they needed fresh eyes in there. Someone maybe who could think a little bit bigger. And
this is an established team you're taking over?
Yeah.
As what, the head of Japan?
Head of Japan, yeah.
So is this the president or managing director? What is it?
It was it was executive managing director for, it's a company called Bravado.
Bravado is the entity here?
Bravado is a subsidiary of Universal Music, and it handles all of the merchandising for international
And so how big is the team at that time?
It's quite a small team, like 4 people.
Okay, so again, you're sticking with these quite small teams.
Yeah.
Right? Okay.
And Thomas was actually quite an easy fix because we had a wonderful partner with Sony Creative, and it was really just about getting the strategy right and about doing some new stuff. Bravado was a little bit different in that it is largely an apparel business. Oh. And apparel, I learned very quickly, is a very, very specialized business. And it really wasn't something I could really do myself. I just didn't have that expertise or those networks. So my job there was really to find the person who was going to do this business.
Right.
Now, one thing and another, and helping on other projects as well, it all took about 3 years or so. But, I found he's still there. He's a brilliant person. And he turned the business. It was quite a small business when he took over, and he tripled the business in no time at all. And it was just about sort of
the right person
doing
for
it
the right match
way.
for the right time.
Yeah.
If you want to be successful as a leader, do the Leadership Training for Managers course. All companies need people who can both manage and lead. Leading people screams out for real skills in communication, dealing with all different types of people, being excellent at innovation, planning, delegation, handling mistakes, doing performance reviews really well, and inspiring and motivating the team. Do the Leadership Training for Managers course now in either Japanese or English. So Frank, what happens after Universal?
Well then, just by twist of fate, HarperCollins was back in the market looking for a managing director for Japan. Now, a lot had changed in the interim. HarperCollins, when I was running it, was really distribution, sales of English language books. The new HarperCollins had acquired a company called Harlequin, that you might know, or Mills and Boon, the series romance business. They'd acquired that globally. So, and in buying that, they bought this network of local language publishers, all over the world. It was an amazing acquisition. And in Japan, it was especially interesting because what they'd done in Japan was they'd created manga from the series. You probably know the little novellas is what people think of, I think, when they think of Harlequin or Mills and Boon. In Japan, it's more about the manga. And they built a huge business, and they've done it in partnership with a SoftBank company called SoftBank Creative.
So are these manga showing foreign men and foreign women in romantic situations, or Japanese men and women in romantic situations? It's
almost entirely the foreign stories as they are.
Okay, so it's quite believable then.
Yeah.
As opposed to a Japanese equivalent of the same storyline with Japanese people in it.
All of that was always the question brand-wise is, do you take it? And actually that's when there are things that can be done with that brand. But yes, the manga were a fairly accurate, reinterpretation of the stories from overseas, and it was all the same, the secret babies and the there's always a heroine in the middle, and everything turns out happy for her in the end of the story, no matter what the theme is.
As it should. So how many people are at HarperCollins by this time?
That was going to be coming. There's 40 people.
40 at that time, right? So you've gone from, large teams back to, smaller teams, very hands-on, back to 40. So what was the transition like?
So 60 people.
60 was it? So what's the transition like going from 5 back to something like 60?
It depends how you approach it. If I went in and wanted to get involved in all the detail of this happening, although I had to get involved in some detail, some analysis of the business, but in terms of running the business, I approached that in the same ways I'd approached everything before, and that was really as a brand business, trying to figure out what the brands were, and then getting people on board on a brand-driven strategy.
Some of the people who were there before, were they still there?
No.
Oh, so it had a complete turnover. So you didn't really have any.
It was actually the Harlequin business, which the old HarperCollins business had disappeared.
Oh, okay. So you got the
Harlequin business. Was rebranded.
Right. So when you come into a business like that, and you've been out of that business for a while, how do you establish your credibility as the leader to run that business? With your Japanese team, I mean. How do you establish credibility with the Japanese team? Here I am. I'm now in charge. Follow me.
I think, again, it's just going back to that sort of figure, making sure everyone's on board with the why.
How do you do that? How do you make sure they're on board with the why?
What's the strategy we're doing?
Yeah. How do you go from understanding the what to understanding the why? How do you make that bridge, as you referred to earlier?
So say if you ran a Harlequin business badly, it really is, at the core of the business is this series publishing. It's very formulaic, template-based, and you would just keep on doing the same thing and pumping that stuff out there all the time. If you approach it as a brand, you'd be more focused on the customer and what's happening there, what do we actually have, and while servicing the existing market, what's the market going to look like in 5 years, and how do we prepare for that? So they were the questions I started to ask.
Presumably no one was asking those questions prior to that.
Well, I'm sure they were, but they're just so busy doing what they're required to do. It's an incredible volume of, the number of titles that they had to put out every month just doing that. But they're how many? I should remember the exact number we were doing now.
A rough number would be fine.
It's like 40 titles every month at least.
40 titles a month, so it's a sort of industrial printing manga production complex we're talking about here, right?
Because they're doing manga and they're doing the series as well, and within each of those, the series comprises sort of 3 different sub-series, and so it's a huge volume that they're putting out. So, understandably, that's what they're focused on. That's what they're doing.
So, what were the people issues for you in that situation?
It was really bringing them into that, getting to think about, while doing their day jobs, was also to think about, okay, well, what's the strategy to make sure we still have a brand in 5 years' time?
How do you get them to go through? What's the process for them? I'm busy. I've got 40 titles a month to pump out here, Frank. Pretty busy, Frank. I don't know. I've got much thinking time, excess capacity here. How do you get people who are that busy to project into 5 years in the future female consumer in Japan will want X, Y, Z? What is the process you went through to get people to switch their focus to a future potential business?
Yeah. If I backpedal a little bit before getting into that answer, in that just to describe what the HarperCollins business was actually. So HarperCollins bought this Harlequin series romance business with 2 purposes. One was because it was a great business in itself. The other was to use that as a base to build what's called trade publishing, general books that are sold through the bookshop, so fiction, non-fiction. And what HarperCollins was trying to do there is, HarperCollins is very, very focused on serving their authors with the best possible service, giving the authors the best possible service, and being able to publish in multiple languages and promote those books all over the world is a huge service to the authors. So what they want, what Harper's is doing, is running this Harlequin business and then also building this trade business as well. So it's actually there are 2 sides of the brain really. So how I approached it was, ultimately they're both brand businesses, and ultimately they have to have a strategy. Both businesses have to have a strategy. The new trade business was sort of the easier one to try and define, what the strategy was, and use that to show people. So don't just tell people, but show people. So what I did, my approach was to use the trade business to say, okay, we're not a Japanese publisher. We are a subsidiary of the 2nd largest publisher in the world. We know Japan. Apart from me, all of the staff was Japanese. Practically all the staff had more experience in publishing than I did. We knew the market.
So the language in the company was English or Japanese?
Japanese.
Japanese,
yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Although there were some great bilingual people there, which were very important, but generally it was Japanese. And publishing is a very, very Japanese business. But what I was trying to do was really to change the mindset to say, no, you're not just this Japan business, you're part of this massive thing. So let's try and marry the 2. So let's understand what HarperCollins is trying to do globally. It's trying to leverage its scale and its network to bring in, big international authors, and it's also trying to help us and France and all the other international offices to punch above their weight. They're saying to us, what can we do? How can we support you in doing this? And they genuinely were saying that. So my approach was to, you can talk about stuff until the cows go home, but doing it is a much better way of doing it. So I started to look for a project that I could do that would show them, what that might look like. And it was 2017, and I started to think about, okay, who do I know? Who would make an interesting book? And celebrities and talent and everything is obviously something that's quite easy to work with and promotable in Japan. And I thought, I'd worked with a lot of people with Guinness World Records, a lot of musicians and sports people and this sort of thing. And this is a true story. I was at home. I'm a big soccer fan. I was watching Japan playing Australia in the qualifiers for the 2018 World Cup. This is mid 2017. And Japan beat Australia 2-0. The captain, Maya Yoshida, I actually knew him. He was Universal Music just happened to be his agent for media work. And he would come in when he was back in Japan. Anytime he'd come into the office, and I'm a huge soccer fan, so I'd make sure I got time with him, and I'd just sit around and chew the fat with him. Really, I didn't have anything to do in a business sense with him, but I'd met him a few times and talked to him. And I remember him. The impression that I took away from talking to him was, he was really committed to. He's now on loan in Italy, but he plays for Southampton in the Premier League. And he was really committed to the club. It really sort of took me back, how committed he was. And they were very settled in Southampton. He was involved in the community in all sorts of ways and everything. And I remember that he had that commitment to the club. So I thought, okay, if we try and sign him up for a Japanese book, right before the World Cup, he's the captain of the team. Kodansha, Shueisha, all these other Japanese publishers who are as big as HarperCollins is globally, the bigger publishers in Japan, massive companies that we can't compete with. I said, well, what can we do? And I remembered that he had this, commitment to the club and everything. And I said, well, has he really been able to tell his story to the fans in Southampton or to Premier League fans generally in Japan? And I thought, well, what if we offer to do that for him? What if we offer to do a bilingual book? We'll give him a book in English where he can tell his complete story to Premier League fans, Southampton fans, and in return he gives us a book in Japanese that we normally would never get. We never have an access to an author of that celebrity of his stature, and he loved it.
Wow!
And it happened, and we did it. And so by doing that, it was a great project and a great book, and it worked really well. And I think he was very happy. It sold well. But the big thing that I got out of it was that I was able to show the team, okay, well, this is what it looks like. In order to make this book in English, I had to pull out all sorts of favors and from the head of nonfiction publishing in the UK, an extremely busy person who's got a huge slate already. And I got him to do this book that really didn't have any direct benefit for him. He was only doing it for Japan. But he did it because the company as a whole was, committed to making this thing happen. It really is the CEO's vision to make it happen. So I got that support and I was able to do it. So that's how I did. The answer to your question in a long, convoluted way was to show them how to do it.
The issue there, though, is always how much of the innovation that happens in Japan is driven by us as leaders, as non-Japanese leaders, because we bring a different set of experiences, education, perspective, viewpoints, thinking to problems that is perhaps a little bit different from a Japanese upbringing with the same educational system, etc. Yeah. And so the issue there is, how do we make sure that we are not the only source of ideas? Because yes, we can do it, and I struggle with this too. Of how do I leverage the creativity of my team to come up and generate ideas, so I'm not always the trigger point for thinking about, we could do it this way, we could do it that way. So how did you approach that? Or did you just remain the main trigger point for ideas?
I think the more local your product is, the harder that is to do. And conversely, the more foreign your brand is, everyone knows that, to compete with your local competitors, with your Japanese competitors, you have to innovate. You have to do things differently. Otherwise, you're never going to get anywhere. The example I gave there with HarperCollins with the publishing, idea. If we just went head to head with Shueisha, Kodansha, we're not going to get anywhere. We have to think innovatively. We have to think, okay, what can we borrow from or leverage from our head office, from our international network, to allow us to punch above our weight here in Japan.
Did you have a process for that, though, Frank? Like, was there the Frank Foley innovation process that you developed, or did you get someone to come in and help with that, or was it an osmotic process? I mean, how did that innovation leveraging go on with the rest of the team?
Well, the first thing is I think, people have to buy in on the strategy, and you have to buy in on that. And, when you work for a company like News Corporation, where the strategy is very, very clear, your job is not to change head office's strategy. Your job is to understand what that strategy is and then modify it to make it work in Japan, to resonate with Japanese customers. So that's the first thing. The second thing is just laying down some ground rules. For me, the starting point is always the customer. It's not about manufacturers, and it's not even about competitors. It's all about customers. So once we figure out how or whatever we're doing, whatever we're making, fits in the customer's lifestyle, well, then the argument's over, because you just have to do that. And if doing that and if you've got a competitor like Anpanman out there for Thomas, you got to start thinking about creative ways of how you get around that. Or even if you don't have a competitor, like Guinness World Records does not have a competitor. It's just that the traditional business model didn't really work in Japan, because the book will never sell in the way it does overseas. So we had to think creatively about how we create a new business model for Guinness World Records. The other thing is just, I think, the brand approach. It's just what I've done time and time again, is just to bring it back to the brand all the time. And you start to create a common language then about, okay, what can be done and where are the opportunities.
So I guess there's a certain set of there's a direction as to the vision. There's the mission. Well, we're focusing on the brand. There's also, I guess, a value set around putting the customer at the apex of everything and thinking like that. So you're basically educating the team as this is the perspective, or this is the prism through which we're going to view our work, and this is how we're going to work together. So I don't know about HarperCollins, News Corp, etc., but did you have things like engagement surveys or satisfaction surveys of the staff? Do these things exist in HarperCollins?
We at HarperCollins, it's a MBO system, management by objective evaluation system. So there wasn't an explicit engagement program, but in that process, that came through. But so, for me, engagement was, and this started, I probably at HarperCollins, I focused on it more than anywhere else, was on, I got the sense when I joined that it was a company where the average years of service was like somewhere around 17 years, So there were people who would work there for over 30 years. And, there were certain things were sort of set in stone, and things needed to change, things needed to be opened up. So I really put a lot of effort in HarperCollins, especially in trying to engage everybody, sort of a combination of engagement and ownership.
How did that work? How did you combine ownership with engagement there? What did you do?
I found when I joined, there were some issues with it being a little bit siloed. The editorial department was here and they were making things, and then the marketing department, who would be actually responsible for these things in just a few weeks to get them out into the market, didn't really have all the information they needed from editorial to do it. And then the salespeople, who were sort of the next step down the process, they didn't have all the information either. So the first thing I did was just a really simple physical pipeline that captured all of the information all the way through, including the KPIs, the sales targets, all of the production costs and translation costs, printing costs, everything. So everything was all there on a piece of paper, so everybody could see where things were coming through and what the expectations for each of these titles were. So that information was just laid out there. So that's just the information. The most important thing was to get everyone behind a strategy then for the books that you're publishing. So I set up there was a whole sort of array of things, really. And it was the common theme is pretty physically show things. It's great to have a digital world and everything, but if everything's tied away in computers, no one really knows what's happening. So I set up a Hall of Fame, we called it. And the Hall of Fame was really the editorial people were posting up covers of books that are coming up or information. It was literally a hallway, and it was a big blank wall. So they were putting up covers and what's coming up here. The marketing people were showing, okay, the books that we published, last month, here's all the great coverage we've got from them in the media, and then the salespeople were posting up photographs of displays in the bookshop and everything. So physically, it was all up there. And this was we're publishing every month, so it was a
Constantly
constant
updating.
Changing and everything. So they'd stick things up.
Did that create a buzz in the office?
Absolutely. They stick those things up in the month, and then at the end of the month, we have a show and tell type of thing, where one of the important ground rules for that was whoever did it presents it. It didn't matter if they were 30 years with the company or they joined yesterday. If they did it, they presented it.
Why?
So,
why did you choose to do it?
So they'd own it.
Sorry?
So they'd own it.
Right, because you've got a hierarchy in Japan of I'm the senpai, I'm the senior. I should be the one presenting this on behalf of the group, not Muggins there, who's quite junior to me. So you're breaking that hierarchy rule there to get that ownership. How is that received?
Well, if you're not comfortable with it, that's too bad sort of thing. And there's a little bit of that. But on the whole, it was welcomed. People, my
being
view
recognised by the people who are doing it would have been tremendous, right?
Yeah. And people are people, so that's what it is. It's recognition and then some form of reward. The recognition itself might be enough of a reward, and we built that into it as well, sort of the reward thing.
Did you have to go and talk to the more senior people and say, hey, listen, by the way, we're going to have this new system every month. We're going to have go through what we've been doing, and I'm going to ask the people who are actually doing the work to present. Now, some of them will be junior to you in the company, but this is an idea I have around getting ownership and getting people motivated, engaged, and I want your corporation to help me do this. Or did Frank just say, right, you're presenting?
If I was asked today, or sort of 2-3 years ago, what was your weakness? What was your biggest weakness? That would have been it. I intended to do that, and I thought I was doing that. But I must admit that sometimes, things moved a little bit too quickly for some of the more conservative members of staff. And it's something I learned out of that, and would probably be a little bit better at it later on.
But I still think it relates to trust too, doesn't it? Because when you're the only foreigner in the company, and you're coming in, you have the MIDA book deal, which is, really opening people's eyes to what's possible. You're now getting showcasing, you're getting people who are relatively junior to have ownership. You're changing the structure here. How do you get people to come with you and have the trust in what you're doing? How did you go around building the trust with the team, given you've got quite a big, range there of people, very long-termers to relatively new people?
I mean, it's, a lot of it is just doing it as you go along. But I think, there's a fairness that's built into the whole thing as well. Yes, there's hierarchy, but there's also, that was the way I did it, and that was my philosophy, and I was the head of the business. So there's a certain amount that I think you can just claim that, look, it just has to happen this way. This is the way we're doing it. And for that particular business, it really did need to happen that way. One of the other elements of this sort of transparency and ownership was we'd set up project groups for particular titles, for like the top AAA, what we call AAA titles. And the composition and the leadership of that group was really determined by whatever the book was. We had a book, an Elon Musk book on Tesla. The head of that was a bloke from IT who was just like an expert on Tesla. He was just, he was a car enthusiast, and it didn't matter that he was from IT. He was the expert on it, so he was the top. We were doing a book on wellness. There was a lady in finance who was a very sort of wellness. She did yoga, and she was very health conscious and everything. She knew all of that, so she was the person to lead that. And for the most part, I was surprised even, that people really just fitted into that dynamic really well, even if they were much older or more senior. The meeting dynamic worked pretty well. The other thing is, I stayed out of all of that. My general approach is, particularly in more recent years, is really just get the right people in the job for whatever needs to be done. To give them the general direction, the strategy, and check back every once in a while and everything. But for the most part, get out of the way and let them do their jobs, and let them come back and tell everyone what's happening.
And so we've talked a lot about innovation and engagement and trust and challenges of leading in Japan. Are there any things about leading in Japan that I haven't asked you, Frank, that I should have?
I think the balance in your role between, whether you are there to enforce the head office strategy or whether you're an advocate for the local Japan strategy, and getting that balance right is important. On the one hand, you don't want to be seen by the staff as just, telling them all what to do and I don't care what you think. On the other hand, you can't be going back to head office all the time and telling them that Japan is different.
How soon does that get old with head office?
To be honest, what I found with a lot of companies is that they're conditioned to believe that Japan is different, and I've been saying no, it's not that different. Japan is.
Was that a good tactical move, Franco? Wouldn't you have left it as, Japan's totally different. I'm the only guy around here who knows how to run it. Yeah. Trust me with the goods here.
No, well, I'd say that Japan is it's intellectually it's no different than New York is different from Buenos Aires, or and like sending someone from even within America, from Los Angeles to Boise, Idaho, they're going to have cultural differences there, But no matter where you go, there are going to be differences. And yes, Japan might seem a little bit more extreme every once in a while, but intellectually, it's the same thing. We're talking about people. It's a developed economy. It's a sophisticated economy, educated people. They're human beings. We're dealing with the same emotions. It's just the specifics where we need to understand what the differences are. But at the end of the day, for me, you are the advocate for the local business at the end of the day, and I say that because as a foreign brand, and that's what I've done all my life. As a foreign brand, you have to have a local strategy. I don't think I've seen any brand that's been able to come into Japan and just do it the way they did it in the original.
Are you doing business with Japan? Do you really know how things work? Japan Business Mastery provides the answers. Do you have the right networks and know how to create them? Do you know how to get on the same wavelength with Japanese buyers? Do you know what being trustworthy looks like from the Japanese perspective? Japan Business Mastery is based on more than 30 years' experience in Japan and will become your go-to guide. Want to succeed in Japan? Buy Japan Business Mastery now. There's plenty of big companies who've failed here completely. Plenty. Yeah. So many have succeeded, but many have failed as well. Yeah. So what would be some advice you'd give to someone who's being sent to Japan or has arrived in Japan? Okay, go to Japan, turn the operation around, get things moving over there. They don't know Japan, they don't speak the language like you and I do, and everything looks a bit different. What do we do here? What would be some advice for them?
The first question I'd have is not so much for that person coming out, but I'd have a question for the company as to whether that's actually the best thing to do, is to send someone out. To send someone out, what you're saying is that our product is so proprietary, or so unique that nobody who's already in Japan can understand it. I would argue that in most cases, it would be easier for someone who is here and understands Japan and has the networks and has the language and everything. It's easier for them to get their mind around a business that they're not completely familiar with than it is for the person coming from head office to get their mind around Japan and get up to speed quickly. So that's the first thing I'd ask the company is, why don't you employ someone like Frank Foley instead of sending someone from head office?
Exactly. Or Greg Story for that matter, but I'm no longer on the market. Right. But anyway, keep going.
But say they are sending someone out. The first piece of advice I'd have, and I feel very strongly about this, is HR is your best friend. And if your local company doesn't have a good HR person, get them. I spent a year and a half at least at HarperCollins finding the right person. I found her, and the company, it's just night and day once you get that person in there. Everyone starts to feel more relaxed. They feel like, okay, it's fair now. I've got somewhere to go if I have any problems. So HR is your best friend. As I said, I would advise them to, when it comes down to the advocate for Japan or head office and everything, you're here to leverage the strategy and whatever you've got from head office, but ultimately you're here to understand what the Japan strategy must be, understand Japanese consumers. So you're going to be on that side of it at the end of the day. You are the advocate, and you've got to position yourself as the advocate. One of the big differences I think, a lot of people find working in Japan is with how sometimes women do not get a fair go in Japanese companies. And I think that might be, for someone who's come here for the first time and would be used to a more equal opportunity environment overseas, that might be a big thing. So I'd pay attention to that and just really have a look around and see if, are all those men in those jobs because they're the best person and that woman is there in a more junior position because of skills, or is there something else happening? I'd just be sort of sensitive to that. The other thing I would say is don't be afraid to cut out the cancer. You've got an opportunity for the first, few months when you're here to make changes where it'll be understood that, okay, the new alpha male has come in and, things are going to happen.
Or alpha female.
Alpha female, yes.
As well.
Yeah. I've just sort of contradicted myself there, haven't
I? Don't worry. We know what you mean.
But if you're going to make change, if your gut's telling you that there's an issue here, do it. And I think, myself included, some people maybe we bought into the myth that, you can't get rid of people in Japan, and we were reluctant to do it. And this can really, when you really try and put your strategy in place and you've got someone senior in the company who's swimming the other way, it confuses the staff. It undermines your own position as the leader of the business.
And you've had this experience of having these people swimming the other direction, yeah?
Yeah.
And did you hold off getting rid of them? Is that the lesson you learned?
I've done it well in some occasions, and I didn't take action on others, and that's why I'd
and the contrast is very
extreme,
very plain. Yeah. So Frank, give us a bit of a PR for what you're doing now, because I know you've started your own company. Tell us a little bit about what you're doing.
Well, I mentioned earlier on that I stopped at one stage to look at what I could, set up a consultancy myself, and I'm doing that again now. But I'm focused on writing a book. Ultimately, you are a prolific author, and other friends of mine here, many of them have written down their experiences, and I think I've actually been, working with all these very colourful brands like Thomas the Tank Engine, the Rolling Stones, Guinness World Records, National Geographic. I've got just a wealth of case studies that are relevant to, all sorts of situations. And I think it'd make an interesting story. I'm interested in teaching as well. I think, I'm not an academic as you are, straddling both sides with business and academia. I'm not an academic, but I'm what I call the colour man. I'm the perfect person. If you're a marketing professor and you want to add a bit of colour to your to what you're teaching, I'll come in with these case studies from Thomas the Tank Engine, toilet paper, or Guinness World Records, all the interesting events and situations we've had with that. So that's what I'm interested in doing, is really just pulling together everything that I've done so far and sharing it.
What do you call your new company?
Next Big Thing.
Next Big Thing.
Yeah.
Okay, people want to find out more about that, they could just Google Next Big Thing and...
well, LinkedIn is the best place to go at the moment.
Okay, LinkedIn. Yeah. So Frank Foley at LinkedIn.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, so Frank, good luck with your new endeavours.
Thanks very much.
And as you mentioned, Japan is an interesting place and many things pop up. So who knows what the next stage may involve for you, but I wish you all the best with it.
I'm looking
Thank
forward
you for
to it.
sharing today. Right. It's very exciting what you talked about. And I think we got good insight into some of these big famous company names and what's it like on the inside. So thank you.
Thanks very much. Thanks for having me.
So please join us again for our next episode of Japan's top business interviews.